Councillor Anderson, Councillor Barker, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Clark. Just going to check if we get Councillor Cooper. We don't seem to have Councillor Cooper. I'll just check if we've got Councillor Dewar. No, we don't seem to have Councillor Dewar. And I'll check for Councillor Fagan. No, we don't have Councillor Fagan. We have Councillor Gowland. I'll check for Councillor Lindsay Hamilton. No, we don't have Councillor Hamilton as yet. I'll check for Councillor Keat. Yeah, we have Councillor Keat. We have Councillor Lambie, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Loudon, Councillor Marsh. I'll check for Councillor McAdams. We don't have Councillor McAdams. We have Councillor MacDonald, Councillor McDougall, Councillor McGeever, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Razak, Councillor Robb, Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott, Councillor Thompson. I'll just check for Councillor Toner. We don't have Councillor Toner. We have Councillor Walker, and I'll just check for Councillor Williams. Yeah, we have Councillor Williams. And with that, I'll hand you back to the Chair for today's business. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susan. Item 1 is just declaration of interest, so can I ask anyone who has any to let us know now? Not seeing any at all, so with that we'll move on to item 2. Minutes of the previous meeting. It's pages 3 through 8 in your pack. I'm going to ask members to confirm that that's a correct meeting, or to approve that that's a correct record of the previous meeting.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We move on to our monitoring item. It's item 3, pages 9 through 36 in your packs. The Good Food Strategy update for quarter 2 of the financial year. I'm going to invite Michelle Wilkie to run us through it. Over to you, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on the status of the Good Food Strategy actions and measures as at the year-end 2023-2024. This follows on from the quarter 2 midway position, which we reported at the last Climate Change and Sustainability Committee meeting, which was held in February 2024. At item 3, we have a reminder of the background to this strategy, which was approved by the Executive Committee on the 4th of December 2019, the full strategy covering a 5-year period from 2020 to 2025. At item 3.5, we know that the particular action plan that we're reporting on here covers the 3rd year of the strategy, 2023-24. Item 4, we provide a round-up of the performance measures, both the quantitative measures within this action plan and also the improvement actions, the more project-like measures. And the table at 4.2 provides a summary of performance, firstly in relation to the quantitative measures. So we can see from the table that 55% of the performance measures within the action plan have been met. That's 12 measures. 45% of the measures are either contextual or are to be reported at a later stage. That equates to 10 measures. Of these 10, 8 out of the 10 fall into this contextual category, i.e. they don't have a target and they're for information only. In the case of the other 2, the information is not yet available, but we're not expecting any slippage in these 2 areas based on the data that we have at this moment. There are no ambers or reds, i.e. no slippage against targets for the quantitative measures. If we turn to the table at 4.5, we have a performance breakdown of the projects this time, and we can see that 24% of the actions are complete in entirety, and 71% of cases, timescales and targets have been met for the year. There is no major slippage, but there is one action which is showing minor slippage, and that relates to networking among food stakeholders. The Policy Officer for Food left her post this year, and that has had an impact on networking activities around food. As a result, there's been a lack of resources to support this activity. Other options to encourage a partnership approach around food are currently being explored to kind of fill that gap, if you like, as a result of the post holder leaving. At item 4.7, we note that the appendix at the back of the report sets out in full our progress on all the actions and measures within the Good Food Strategy, but we've pulled some notable highlights into this covering report at 4.7. I won't go through all of these this morning, but we bring your attention to some of them. So under the theme Good Food at Home and the Community, one of the highlights here is that the Youth, Family and Community Learning Service and Education have delivered a large variety of food-related learning programmes to 686 learners through the year. Courses were delivered to young carers, vulnerable families, adults and young people, school groups, adults in recovery, pupils at Care Campus, literacy learners, families and adults referred from schools, food banks, DWP, disengaged secondary pupils and groups of care experienced young people. These programmes covered outdoor cooking, the basics of cooking, learning about energy and nutrients, cooking for health, learning to run a cafe, exploring hospitality as an industry, cooking together as a family, and so on. And all of the programmes are listed within the report. Under the theme of good food economy, we can see that 95% of food businesses were compliant with food safety statutory requirements this year, thanks to the work of our Environmental Health Service. And we engaged with the food and drink sector over the course of the year. This included activities such as South Lanarkshire Council continuing to have a seat on the committee for the Lanarkshire Larder to ensure that their outcomes are achieved, including increased membership and networking. We supported 8 local businesses through the EAT South Lanarkshire Business Accelerator programme, and we promoted business-to-business events, including Larder of the Lowlands, which took place in April this year, and we're currently promoting the National Meet the Buyer event, which is organised by the Supplier Development Programme and will take place in June. Under the theme of good food and the environment, the Waste Education team have updated their education materials used in all our primary schools to include a specific section on food waste reduction and recycling. And they've also issued a questionnaire to assess the kids' understanding in the primary schools about food waste. Under the theme of good food governance, we note that the Rural Conference took place in February 2024 with more than 100 participants. The conference was an opportunity to discuss community food growing projects and discuss opportunities to secure funds to assist in the growth of these projects. I'd like to refer you back to the recommendation at 2.1 of this report and ask you to approve the 23-24 Q4 Good Food Strategy update. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. I'm just going to ask any member who wishes to either comment or ask a question to indicate now. First up, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that report. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I've got a few questions, so I'll ask them at once, but I can come back in if need be. So the first of my questions is on the departure of the policy officer, which is mentioned on page 12 and 13. How do we feel these new arrangements to fill that gap will work? Is it working just now? How much of a gap currently is there? And it mentions that the future of this role is being considered. When should we expect that kind of a decision to be made on the future of that role? And the second part of my questions, on page 22, it talks about annual public procurement spending on local food, and that percentage has been going down slightly. So in 21-22, 39 and 36%, and it's currently to date at 33%. Is there an explanation for that short drop-off? And the third question, just above that, it talks about fair trade spending. Now it mentions it in terms of monetary figures. How much, do you know roughly how much of a percentage that is, and how much the rise has been due to the rise in food prices? Like, are we actually buying much more, or is it just the cost of what we're buying and going up? Again, I know it's a few questions, but I'm happy to come back in.
Thanks very much, Ross. So I think David wants to come in on that one, if that's okay, Ross. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Clark. Thanks very much, Chair. I'll maybe cover some of this and pass over to Michelle for the some of the more detailed answers. In terms of the Food Policy Officer, we're awaiting guidance from the Scottish Government on the Food Nation bill. So the Good Food Nation Act, which came into force in 2022, we're expecting some guidance from them on terms of our requirement to provide a local Good Food Nation plan. So with the departure of the Food Policy Officer, what we're doing at the moment is we're waiting for that to come in, and then we will reassess what the best way forward is in terms of providing the right solution to our food policy going forward. We are engaging in the meantime with a range of different services across the council, including the council's community engagement team, and reaching out to different areas across the council in order to take forward and continue to take forward our commitments within this plan. So we believe that we're in a good position with regards to the plan as we've got it at the moment. We think we're in a much better position than a lot of other local authorities, in particular through the work that the Food Policy Officer is undertaking. But we want to wait until we've got more information on what the future requirements are going to be, and then we will take stock of that and then come forward with proposals how the best way to deliver on that for the council. So that's that. In terms of the local spend, I would anticipate that will fluctuate to some level year on year. I don't know in terms of, Michelle, if you've got any other information over and above that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, in terms of local food, that has been a difficult process in terms of trying to increase the percentage uptake of local food for various reasons. Facilities is obviously the service that is the biggest purchaser of local food within the council. There's various reasons why it's difficult in order to access local producers as opposed to go to the Excel framework, and that's sometimes due to the capacity of local food suppliers to provide the quantities and the kind of, I suppose, urgent service that's sometimes required when it comes to providing school meals, etc. So I know that is a journey that they're on, that they're looking at that, procurement's looking at that, but it's quite a difficult task, and it's ongoing. There's been a piece of work called the Market Capacity Assessment that's been undertaken to try and improve activity around that, including bringing in SLLC, who at the moment actually purchase quite a lot of local produce for the Shatler Country Park, etc. And it's in some ways easier for SLC to do that because they're not buying quite the same quantities, etc. That work will continue on, you know, and I suppose the partners who are involved in that, including economic development, procurement, etc., are working together on that.
Thank you. Do you want to come back in, Ross?
Yeah, thank you for those answers. Just on the fair trade aspect of it, just try to find out, has there also been a rise in percentage of the amount of fair trade that we're buying, or is it largely down to the rise in food prices?
I think David Booth wants to come in on that one specifically.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. I will need to come back to you in terms of that percentage. We would need to go and work out what that percentage is. In terms of the amount that we're spending over the last few years, that has increased, but as you say, the cost of food kind of influences the spend as well. So we do try and purchase as much fair trade food that we can. And in particular in this building, we make efforts to do so as well. But in terms of through the framework, that's the amount. But I'm happy to come back to you with percentages when I've got them.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Ross. John Ross.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I also welcome the report. I'm just looking for a wee bit of clarity on an item that's on page 12, and it's to do with the Good Food Growing, and it's to do with the allotment site at Shatler. Speaking to one of my neighbours at the weekend who has an allotment there, and she was saying that that there are a small number of allotments that look as if no work has actually been done on them since they've been taken over. Now, I know for various circumstances change when people buy allotments or take on allotments, but do we have any control over, or do we check on whether allotments are actually being used? Because, you know, obviously there's a huge number of people who would like to have these allotments, and the very fact that somebody maybe take one over and never work on it, as I say, there could be underlying circumstances behind that. But do we do anything to make sure these allotments are being used? Any clarity on that, please?
Thanks very much for the question, John. Yeah, I'm going to go to David Booth again, but obviously it's a good question you raise, and it's one we want to see the allotments used to their maximum capacity. And you know, we do have, you know, as you said yourself, it may be a small number, but I'm going to go to David Booth now.
So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. I'll need to come back to you on that specifically in Charleroi because I just don't know the circumstances behind that. As you say, there may be reasons why someone has an allotment and has not been able to kind of start working on it. I would also need to check in terms of the contractual agreement we have with people in terms of allotments about reclaim of them. But it's a fair point you raise in terms of there is a waiting list. I know there's a lot of people that are keenly waiting on allotments, and it would, you know, it doesn't seem productive to have allotments sitting there and not being worked on, particularly where the people are waiting. So I'm happy to go back and I'll check that out and come back to you specifically on that issue.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. Page 12, good food economy, it says that 95% of food businesses were compliant with the food safety statutory requirements. How many businesses do we check?
Thank you very much. David Booth again, coming in.
Again, those checks are done through our Environmental Services Department, Councillor Anderson. What we'll do is through a rolling programme, we'll get to every business. So in terms of, we check in a sample of businesses every year. So again, I would need to come back to you in terms of the how that works on an ongoing basis. But it's my understanding that we will at some point be checking businesses on a regular basis. But the frequency in terms of those checks, I'd need to come back on, which I'm happy to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor Keat.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just a very brief comment to commend the work of the Youth Family Community Learning Service in delivering the programmes that they have, particularly with some of the most vulnerable individuals in our community. And I think it would be amiss of us not to include the scale of food poverty that we still have in our communities, something that I've seen firsthand as a volunteer in the Hamilton Churches Drop-In Centre, and worth reminding that we're still waiting on the universal rollout of free school meals across South Lanarkshire, which was a flagship policy and pledge of our Scottish Government. So I look forward to that. But thank you very much to the officers for bringing this strategy together and for the work in supporting the individuals in our communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Mars.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think if I could also welcome the report as a whole, but also in particular page 22, the uptake of primary and secondary school meals, the targets of 65 and 41% respectively. Given those targets are met, I'd be interested to know, firstly, the detail of how those target figures were determined and whether, given that they're met, those will be subject to any review to maintain a stretching target. Also, in terms of that review, whether the background reasons rather than just the actual figures of why we wouldn't have more of an uptake.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that. Yeah, I mean, I also noticed in the report that it was particularly good news to see those targets met, and of course, like you, would like it to continue to set challenging targets going forward. Whether the case is that we can do so now on a rolling basis or whether it's done at a kind of periodic review, to be honest, I'm not sure but most appropriate, but I'm going to see if David wants to add anything to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Mars. In terms of the targets, those targets have been set as we've come out of COVID, so we're kind of bouncing back in terms of setting targets. We would intend to try where we can to increase targets. It's quite difficult in terms of school meals because of the challenges that we have in terms of getting people and young people to engage and paid school meals and free school meals. As you'll know, this has been a long-standing issue in terms of the amount of franchises that exist around about schools at lunchtime and the attraction that pupils have to go to these and get out of the school place. So what we do try and do is we try to be inventive and promote our menus. You'll have seen some of the stuff we do through things like the Go Fresh Gang, in terms of the menus that we've got, which are generally applauded. So it is a challenge. We'll continue to work at it, but it remains difficult given the amount of choice that young people have and around about school meals in terms of what local chip shops and producers like that have. But we continually work on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Final question I'm going to go to... Oh, sorry, Julia, apologise. Do you want to come back in on that?
Yes, I think if I could actually highlight something that I'm sure I've discussed with David previously, and also facilities, that the linkage between the good food strategy in terms of school uptake and the curriculum that's offered in the food technology and home economics in schools may be an opportunity there to advise, educate and encourage towards the foods being provided in schools as an alternative to the fast food outlets that we know are close to schools.
Thank you very much for that. I agree wholeheartedly with you on it would be desirable. Hopefully something can be, the circumstances will allow that to be looked at further. I'm sure we're always keen to do such things. The final question I'm going to go to is Bert Thompson. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's just an observation about information for the panel, really. In Blantyre, we seem to be awash with good eating places. You get a wee Gurkha just opened a new place. The Parkville, of course, Finbars, a Michelin star chef up at Cross Baskets. And just to tell people, it's my intention to visit them all this summer to see the standards, to encourage them to buy local and also to make sure about their food waste. And I hope to see a few colleagues there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Certainly support the use of all local businesses, and I imagine you'll be having a great time over the summer, Bert. So thank you for that. No further questions, so I'm going to ask committee to agree to note the report. Agreed. Thank you very much. With that, move on to item 4, Carbon Management Interim Updates for 23-24. I'll direct you all to pages 37 through 46 of your packs, and I'm going to invite Catherine McCafferty to speak to us today. Catherine, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to update the committee on the mid-year position with respect to the Council's carbon emissions for financial year 23-24, reflecting April to September 2023. Section 3 of the report provides the legislative background and the Council's duties under the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. These are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030, 90% by 2040 and 100% by 2045 compared to 1990 levels. However, as has been widely reported, there has been a recent change to these targets. On the 20th of March, the Climate Change Committee, the CCC, published its annual report which highlighted that the committee did not believe that the Scottish Government would meet its statutory 2030 goal to reduce emissions by 75%. Following that report, on the 18th of April, the Scottish Government announced that the 2030 target and the annual carbon targets would be replaced with a system measuring emissions every 5 years. It was confirmed that the new legislation would be introduced to address the matters raised by the CCC and to ensure that the legislative framework better reflected the reality of long-term climate policy making. However, the 2045 target is still in place in legislation. Section 3 also provides a background on the Council's carbon footprint, which we have been reporting since 2005, and the scope of this carbon footprint covers energy from council buildings, council fleet, employee travel, household waste and street lighting. In section 3.4 describes how a target was not set for 23-24, but instead it was agreed that the aim should be to reduce as much as possible compared to the previous year. The Council has, however, agreed a zero direct emissions target by 2038. As a reminder, direct emissions are fossil fuel emissions from our buildings and from our fleet. This target is in line with the ambitious public sector targets detailed in Scotland's Climate Change Plan and Scotland's Heat and Building Strategy. In section 4 of the report, we describe the 3 categories or scopes of carbon emissions which we will use from now on in our reporting. This is in line with the Public Sector Climate Change Duties Report and Greenhouse Gas Protocol reporting. An explanation of each of the scopes is contained in section 4.1. Section 4.2 and 4.3 provides an overview of the scope of the Council's carbon footprint and includes 3 new areas that we will be reporting in our carbon footprint from 24-25. These are waste and water from our council buildings and carbon emissions from home working. This is consistent with which we report with the Public Sector Duties Report to the Scottish Government. Now, this will increase the reported emissions going forward. However, it will also increase the accuracy of our data. It should be noted that this could change again going forward as we get more guidance from the Scottish Government on what's to be included in our Scope 3 carbon emissions. Section 5 of the report outlines the Council's interim carbon footprint for the year 23-24. There has been a 4.49% reduction in carbon emissions compared to the same period in 22-23, and there has been an 8.08% reduction in Scope 1 emissions compared to the same period in 22-23. However, it's worth noting that these figures do not cover the winter heating period, and that oil from heating is not included in these figures. These will be reported at year-end. Section 5.3 highlights that the carbon figures are calculated using the greenhouse gas conversion factors for company reporting for electricity, gas and waste. These are published annually by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. These factors are subject to change due to updated data, shifts in energy sources and advancements in methodology. As a result, the factors vary from year to year, which can impact the Council's carbon footprint. Section 5.6 provides some contextual data, and sections 5.7 to 5.10 explain in details the reasons for the reductions for each department. Section 6 describes how over the last few months meetings have been held with resources to discuss potential areas for carbon reductions over the next year, the aim being to help us form an overall target for 24-25. However, carbon reduction plans are at an early stage, and at 7.1 we are therefore recommending that we again have a target to reduce carbon emissions as much as possible compared to previous years, rather than a set target. In the remainder of the report, we outline some activity that resources and services are progressing that will put the Council in a better position to develop longer-term carbon reduction targets and a carbon reduction route map. These reports are highlighted in section 7.2. Section 7.3 and 7.4 highlight the role of the newly formed Climate Intelligence Service and partnership working with the Scottish Government and other local authorities on developing robust emissions reporting. All the standard implications are noted in sections 8 to 12, including the input is required from all resources and the significant financial implications to achieving national net zero targets. To return to the recommendation of the report, which is to note the mid-year position in respect to South Lanarkshire's carbon emissions for year 23-24. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Can I invite any members who wish to comment or ask questions to indicate now? Councillor Barker.
Right, thank you, Chair. Thanks for that report. And I do have to, it may come later, but the awareness the other week on heat efficiency I thought was very well done and very useful. I've got one detailed question. Just the briefest summary of the cost of the electric vehicle fleet. I mean, we know it costs, but just how expensive is it compared to what just carry on as normal? But I mean, just a general comment on that. On 5.7.2, there was just a little interesting bit about the supply of electricity as its carbon content is being decided to be increased by 7%. And I just wondered, is that because things are getting worse, or is it because somebody decided we'd not been tough enough earlier? Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Ralph. Sorry, is it you? David would like to come in. Sorry.
I'm going to defer the fleet question to Colin Park, who I think is online at the moment, if that's all right, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, over to yourself.
Thanks, Chair. And I will just kind of pick up that question from Councillor Barker. If you can hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can. I think the kind of cost effectiveness of vehicles compared to petrol or diesel, kind of lots of factors in there, and there's no clear answer. That includes the kind of cost of fuel itself, electricity, the purchase costs, maintenance costs, and whatever incentives are on offer. Price of electricity is obviously key, and I think whilst electricity prices are varying and we've seen an increase in recent years, kind of they generally remain lower than the cost of petrol and diesel. Total cost of ownership of electric vehicles is beginning to emerge is a lot lower as well. Things are changing. The cost of electric vehicles are coming down. They are, I would say, edging it. We don't have all the detail just now. We're going through a bit of a transition in the fleet team. But the bottom line is we need to transition to electric vehicles and low carbon vehicles. So whatever they cost is what they cost. But we are trying to maximise our utilisation of our fleet, making informed decisions in terms of us moving forward. And we are this year doing a wider review of all of our vehicles. And we're now looking to kind of get back on track with kind of vehicle replacement. As you can all imagine, kind of stalled for a good number of years. We had a fleet strategy, we reported to committee in 2019, a 5-year strategy, and we've lost three years of that. So I think in conclusion, to answer Councillor Barker's point, increasing electricity costs are impacting upon the cost effectiveness of electric vehicles. EVs still offer an advantage in terms of fuel efficiency, lower maintenance costs, and potential whole life long-term savings. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Keat.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just on paragraph 3.1, it highlights the Scottish Government's targets of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Members will be aware that the Scottish Government have backtracked considerably on their climate targets across the board. Surprising, even when we did have 2 Scottish Government Green ministers within the administration. So I just wanted to double check that the statistics in paragraph 3.1 are still accurate despite the backtracking of the government.
Thank you very much. My understanding is that, as always, we'll wait for developments from the Scottish Government, but what's in statute is certainly in statute, and we'll work towards it until told otherwise. David Booth, do you want to come in on that?
Thanks, thanks, Chair. In actual fact, I was just going to repeat what you've just said. Is that the statutory situation is as it is at the moment, and we will continue to report on that until until there's a change in the statutory position, rather than just relying on the statements. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robb, do you want to come in?
Thank you. And just to give a bit of background on the national context, all political parties signed up to more stretching targets than the UK Climate Change Committee actually recommended. So it's down to all parties to unite if they want action for climate change and to meet any targets at all. So, and same goes here in South Lanarkshire Council. We have a statutory duty to reduce emissions, and coming back to the excellent report, we've committed to target no direct emissions by 2038 and to contribute to the 2045 targets as well. So just like nationally, action and spend must follow if we're all committed to these targets, which unfortunately didn't happen nationally, but hopefully it can happen here. So, yep, in terms of questions about the report, we want to see a route map, so it's to ask a bit more detail about when you think you'll get to that net zero strategy. Will it include a financial strategy? And bearing in mind that there's a lot of carbon emissions already locked in by not previously focusing enough on targets nationally and taking the action needed, how are we going to adapt? How is the Council working on adaptation strategies, both in the sustainability team but across the Council as well?
Adam, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to go to Adam. Over you go.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Robb. So as Catherine mentioned in the report, discussions are ongoing with resources and services across the Council about how we can plan for these things. At the moment, we are in the data collection phase of preparing a report which will outline how far along our journey we are towards getting to net zero and provide detail on the Council's next steps, including finances required. We're hoping to present this paper to the October committee, and it'll be titled the Carbon Future Targets Report. The paper will look at long-term targets and finances and the actions that we need to take to achieve them. The paper will also look at some of the changes to national legislative targets that have been touched on today, which will obviously also inform our own approach and will include information on other financial strategies and route maps which have been adopted in other parts of the UK. So we want to use them to kind of inform our own approach before we jump in. So we have began meetings with the key services involved. That will be waste, roads and fleet and housing. And the outputs of these meetings will inform the October paper. This initial piece of work will potentially lead to a net zero strategy for the Council. However, we're mindful of setting arbitrary targets and timescales without the finances to implement any plans. For example, you hear from our colleagues in housing on their own journey towards the decarbonisation of buildings and the extent of the financial commitment required for that. But linked to the finances, what we are doing is looking at potential financial models for funding the investment required to achieve net zero, and we're proposing to bring a paper to the August committee which will provide some detail on Glasgow City Council's recently announced green investment team. We're undertaking research on how this could be adapted within the South Lanarkshire context at the moment, and the paper that Glasgow have already presented references the potential for a rollout across the Glasgow City region. So of course we're engaging with officers at Glasgow to identify how this might develop and how we can feed in.
Thank you very much for that, Adam. Kirsten, do you want to come back in?
Just anything else on the adaptation side of things?
Oh, hold on a wee second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Hold on a wee sec till the mic catches up. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that one. So we recently completed our submission to the Scottish Government SNAP 3, so that's the adaptation strategy consultation. What we're waiting for is the results from that consultation, which will obviously inform our own approach as well. I think what we want to do is make sure that what we are doing as a council is reflective of what other local authorities are doing and reflects best practice. I think in terms of our next step, what we'll do is wait for the findings of the SNAP 3 consultation, and then we'll act on them and possibly bring a paper to the committee on those as well.
Okay, thanks very much. In 9.1 as well, we talk about how the council now needs to report on the how we're aligning our spend to meet these targets. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes over time and how we align more spend to make sure all actions, policies and projects contribute to these targets, and that gets political support, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. Councillor Allison.
What has been done to reduce emissions is quite impressive, but the objective here is net zero. So if we only look at emissions, are we certain that we're actually moving towards net zero, and that what we're doing instead is not just deferring the emissions or creating other emissions, and creating other emissions elsewhere? The example I can think of, it's easiest to look at, is a car. Is the production in carbon terms the same for an electric car as it is for a combustion engine? I can understand the emission side, but if we want to achieve net zero, we need to look at the whole picture and not just emissions. Can you tell us what work's been done to make sure that we're going down that line?
Thanks very much, Councillor Allison. Yeah, I think with regards to the example you gave, I know this is one we've discussed before, and I think it's incredibly difficult to actually find detailed evidence for the overall carbon output of certain things through the whole chain. But I'm going to go to Catherine for some detail.
Thanks, Chair. So what we would be referring to is sort of scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that we don't really have control of as part of the council. At the moment, we do report some of our scope 3 emissions in our carbon footprint, for example, our waste from houses and buildings. But we are working with the Scottish Government at the moment. There was a report from the Environmental Standards Scotland which made recommendations to the Scottish Government about Scope 3 emissions, and they had requested that the Scottish Government make Scope 3 emissions mandatory for local authorities. Now, the Scottish Government haven't taken that piece of advice on, but they have to do an improvement plan, which will be going through the Scottish Parliament later in the year, and we would be looking on advice on what our Scope 3 emissions are and what we should be reporting. So we will look for that advice from the Scottish Government, and that will sort of take on, you know, for example, sort of purchasing of vehicles and things like that, and how those emissions should be reported through the council. So it is, like you say, it's a really, really big picture, and there is a lot of work going on nationally and within the council, and we'll take the advice and we'll report on exactly what we sort of need to report on.
Thanks very much. Do you want to come back in, Alex?
No, that's fine. It's pleasing to hear that they're going to start and look at the unintended consequences, because until we do, we're kidding ourselves. We've got a report here says we're heading towards net zero, but we don't know. Okay. We simply don't know.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I feel I need to come in and challenge what Councillor Keat has said. It was actually an opposition target of 75%, which was forced upon the government, and then parties such as his opposed action to reach that target. We are already, you know, nationally halfway to reaching net zero, but there's still a long way to go. That's why the government announced a wave of new actions, such as on car usage, EV charging, you know, consultation on a carbon tax. So there's been lots of actions announced to accelerate our journey to net zero, and I think there needs to be a lot of you know, political buy-in to that, and everyone around the table doing what they can to reach net zero. I also find it quite hypocritical, considering the next potential Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has dropped his £28 billion a year pledge, something that would be very significant and much needed. I actually think Labour are in a good position to talk about reaching net zero, considering they've already seemed to have achieved net zero principles.
Thank you for that, Councillor Clark. I'm not going to put that to officers, obviously. I think I just want to say to committee that this is obviously an issue where it's really important that politicians work across party lines, and largely I think that has been done because there is an agreed sense of urgency and a sense of importance on these issues. So however that shakes out, and it's absolutely right for politicians to make political statements, and I completely understand that, and it's been done from either side of the divide today. But I think if we do want to keep our focus very much on the fact that these things are, it's a national and an international crisis, and it's one that we all have to rise to the challenge to meet together, not just domestically, but globally, and that really is the way I think we want to continue going forward. Councillor Walker.
Oh, me?
Oh, sorry, I forgot you were in there. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you said Councillor Walker. Thank you, Chair. To some extent, Alec made my point in terms of the unintended consequences in the transfer of emissions. For example, if we've more and more people working at home, obviously they're using energy in their houses where they wouldn't be, waste, all of that. And some of the social costs, the hidden social costs to that, I think would bear more scrutiny than they're getting at the moment. But I think that the pertinent point here is I'm pleased to see that there's going to be an investment strategy, and I'd be really interested to have a look at some of the work that's ongoing in Glasgow. Because what is kind of clearly obvious and stated in the paper is to achieve these targets, even at the reduced level of every 5 years, we are unable to do that within current budgets, and that's absolutely clear. So there's going to be an impact, and as everybody in this room is aware, the severity of budgets and the severity of the austerity that's been coming from the Scottish Government for the last 10 to 12 years has already had a severe impact on the most vulnerable people who depend on the services provided by local authorities. So, and I've made this point before, and I don't apologise for making it again, this needs to be supported nationally. It needs to be supported by the Scottish Government. Local authorities need to be supported to achieve these targets, both through a national campaign from Westminster and from Holyrood, which really has not been the case to date across any level or spectrum of local government provision of services to the population. So, as I say, that is my worry, is that we need to be aware of the devastating impact this could have if we are forced into the position where we're having to realign funds further that have been targeted for, I don't know, education, social care, whatever. We cannot, in all conscience, allow that to happen, and I think we need to campaign for additional sources of finance to actually realistically be able to do this, and that requires support from our national governments. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I agree with an awful lot, if not everything you said there, Margaret. I think you spoke very well on it, and we certainly would hope we all share that urge that any transition is a socially just one, and concern that it wouldn't be. With regards to how, just contributing something myself, if I may, I understand that there's already kind of discussions beginning at local authority level and on a regional basis about how they might pool works in terms of infrastructure upgrades and changes to potentially make that a more interesting investment opportunity for the kind of people who can fund things in that scale. But certainly I think that no stone can be left unturned for the very reasons you intimated. So thank you for that. With that, I think I'm going to ask the committee to agree to note the report. Thank you. Thank you. We move on now to item 5, which is non-domestic buildings net zero feasibilities, pages 47 through 52. I'm going to invite Stephen Turner to speak to us on this one.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update on the outcome of 7 feasibility studies that were carried out to assess the investment required to meet the national net zero targets, and then to use the findings from those 7 feasibilities to update estimates of the total capital investment required across the non-domestic operational portfolio. So Section 3 sets out the national background, including the emissions reductions targets still in place for 2045, as emphasised by Catherine. Also goes through the legislation that is planned to meet these targets, for example, the Heat and Buildings Bill, which is currently in consultation. Section 4 goes on to detail the modelling work that took place to show the effects of applying retrofit measures. Those measures are highlighted in Table 1 in Section 4.4 and given the impacts on consumption and emissions. I want to draw particular attention to the Table 2 in Section 4.5, which summarises the findings for the net zero feasibilities for our primary estate. So you'll see by looking down column 1 in the cumulative energy reduction, there's significant improvements as we go through these measures one by one, adding on and layering on through the system. Similarly, as you would expect, from having energy reductions, you've also got carbon reductions that follow. However, in the final column, you can see that the actual operational cost reductions are far less. At Table 3 and at Section 4.6, you can see a similar exercise that's been carried out for wet leisure, and again, the Table 3 summarises the effects of these measures as well as carbon reduction and cost. At 4.7, it really summarises what we've got within there. So for the measures that have been proposed in the table in the earlier section, significant energy and carbon reductions are recognised from implementing these measures. However, from the cost reduction point of view, we don't see that being the case. And just at the end of 4.7, we're saying in there that the average for the feasibilities we had was for a primary school, £3.3 million worth of investment required, which on average would generate £16,500 of savings from utility bills per annum at current day rates. And just in a simple payback, and that's over 200 years. So just to give you an example of the sort of levels of investment. So we can achieve the carbon reductions, we can achieve the energy savings, but it comes at a cost, and it comes at a day-to-day cost. So 4.8 brings together the 7 feasibilities and actually then extrapolates them across the full non-domestic building portfolio that we currently have. And that would then take our estimated investment required at 2023 levels to £927 million. Approximately 192 million of that would apply for what currently is operated by South Lanarkshire Leisure. So section 5 highlights what we're currently doing and what we are investing in energy efficiency measures via SEEF programme, via life cycle maintenance. There is no provision, however, for the transition in heat systems to not just net zero systems, but zero emissions heat systems. So effectively, we are looking at going beyond net zero when it comes to heating. The heating buildings bill will say it's zero emissions. So currently, we have over 300 or approximately 300 buildings that either have gas or gas hybrid or oil hybrid systems. That by 2038 have to be electrified systems that are present within those properties. So this is a huge investment over a 14-year period. So as I said in there, there is currently some investment available, and I know that the recent budget approval, there was an extra £500,000 set aside for additional SEEF. Well, that's well appreciated and will be put to good use. When we're comparing that to a need of 927 million, it puts it into comparison. So, next steps, what we have in there is that the Heat and Buildings Bill, which is out for consultation, and I believe there's a paper coming up shortly that will give some feedback in there. That will confirm the legislative pathway and the timeframes. Now, it's been made clear in the Heat and Building Strategy, and it's been reiterated by government recently, that the 2038 requirement for public sector non-domestic buildings have zero emissions heat or cleaned emissions heat by 2038. If that changes, there's probably some additional time frame, but currently 927 million, 14 years. The outcomes of the feasibilities will be incorporated into our local heat and energy efficiency strategy, which the members awareness session on Friday, which I think was well attended. I gave the background, and I think Councillor Barker had acknowledged that. So that will be incorporated, the findings will be incorporated in the LD strategy, which goes to Exec Committee, hopefully in June, and achieves approval. Employee implications. Obviously, as just said in there, there's just short of 300 buildings currently that have gas. We've got building services engineers that currently service those boilers. So again, by upskilling staff in the coming years, we have that just transition from the employee perspective. So that's just one. Another implication is the fact that from PV systems in the past, we outsourced. That's now been taken in-house, and we do our own PV systems from start to finish. So again, it's upskilling the current workforce to take advantages of the opportunities that the transition is going to offer. Financial implications, again, it's been highlighted in 4.8, over 900 million. 8.2 acknowledges that we do have some limited funding, which is in place and will be utilised to the best of our ability. The transition away from gas to electricity currently, with the cost differential between electricity to gas, means that not only will there be increased capital investment required, but it will also add to day-to-day running costs, unfortunately, as the balance is in there. Although there are some moves taking place at UK government level to look at potentially readdressing that cost imbalance between gas and electricity. So one really important thing again, and I think Adam mentioned that earlier in there, 8.4 taking account of the scale of the investment required alongside the legislative requirements to reduce emissions, it is essential that consideration is given to the funding partnership delivery models that are currently available and seeking to agree which model best suits the Council. Whilst the Scottish Government have stated they will provide some limited funding towards the transition, it is anticipated that private sector funding routes will also be required. So just at the end in there, I would finally return to the recommendations at section 2 and ask that the committee approve that the outcome of the feasibilities completed be noted. It be noted that the updated estimate for total capital investment for net zero would be 927 million. Note that the intention for non-polluting heating systems to be implemented by 2038 and the number of properties that would cover. But also acknowledge that we have existing Fabric First approach, so we are starting along that pathway.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Stephen. Can I ask any councillor who wishes to comment or ask a question to indicate now if they wish to do so? Councillor Rob. Oh, before I do, actually, can I just actually say as well that the awareness session was particularly well attended, and I want to thank everybody who did. Unfortunately, I couldn't, and I want to thank Kirsten, Councillor Rob, for chairing it as well. So I think it's right that we acknowledge that. Thank you. And with that, over to yourself, Kirsten.
Thanks for that. I'm happy to wait if someone else wants to go first.
Oh, no, it's just yourself.
Okay. Okay. Just to thank you very much for all that detailed work. It is that sort of detail that we need to estimate the scary costs, but also the practical things that are the best things to do first. And absolutely, I think the Fabric First approach is spot on. We want to be able to save energy, cut fuel poverty, and then move to sort of the net zero emissions side of things. So I think you've got it spot on there. Yeah, and you're highlighting the differential of the electricity costs. That, as you said to yourself, it would be a game changer if that changed, and really help the market develop in the electrifying. So hopefully Westminster can help do the right thing there. In terms of looking at the scale, it is massive, but I think there's things we can do, and there's other funding out there as well. And I think this sort of list of projects you're developing now will help that you're ready to get the sort of shovel-ready type projects when the funding comes up as well. But we do need to look at aligning spend to sustainable development principles, where everything cuts emissions, reduces poverty, improves the economy as well. So looking at all those projects and making sure that everything gets that triple win for sustainability is good, because as you say, Margaret, there is limited funding, and we don't want to take funding off essential services, but see it as an integrated part where we can save money on buildings so that education can still get enough money to run proper services. So I'll look forward to the C Fund projects, but we'll look at the executive when they're ready. And just to say, I agree with Mark's comment earlier about everyone needing to work together on this one. The costs of not acting are much higher than these scary costs that you've already seen. We've seen it all over the world, and just in the news this week, extreme weather effects are going to take their toll, and already they are. Kind of want to be able to look my children in the eye and make sure that we do everything, that we can tell them we've done everything that we can in our power to improve their future. So the question is, you talked about the workforce planning side of things as well. What's the Council's approach in terms of personnel? Is there an integrated approach to workforce planning to make the most of transition for new areas of work, develop new jobs and so on? I just wondered if there's a kind of council-wide approach to adjust transition and developing the skills that we need in that area.
Thank you very much. Stephen, do you want to come back in on that? Or David, is it yourself who wants to come in? David, sorry.
Yeah, thanks very much. So there's probably a couple of things, Councillor Robin, in respect of that. As Stephen has said, that there's work ongoing in terms of in our colleagues in housing and technical resources and upskilling and looking at what's required in terms of the workforce of the future. We're also through a employability service which now has moved over to Moan Resource and through Alison Brown. we're starting to look about how we create the correct linkages between employability, between the engagement with colleges that we're nurturing and developing, and then how do we make sure that the workforce, our existing workforce and also the workforce that of the future is best equipped to take advantage of the opportunities that come through this type of work, and actually also help to contribute to make a positive difference in terms of what's required for our climate objectives. So there is work it's ongoing, and through the work that we're doing in employability, through the work that we're doing in terms of training and bringing people in, that is an area that is, I think, I would agree, is an area that that we could mine and would give us some real benefits. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Lockhart.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Richard. On you go.
Good, thank you. Well, I mean, it's a terrific piece of work, this. There's no question about it. I mean, obviously, we're all trying our best or trying our hardest to, if you like, implement some of these things, you know, to obviously reduce emissions and so on and so forth. But there's one point that I would like to highlight. And if you turn to the report, page 48, item 4, ground source heat pump for all domestic hot water, blah, 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 all that. I have a major concern here because it sort of backs up to some extent what Alex Allison said. He made a very good point, which is all we ever look at is emissions. We never look at the cost of saving these emissions. And I worry enormously that we're driving ourselves down a deep, dark hole in terms of trying to implement these things at the cost of perhaps other more important social aspects. I mean, you've only got to look at the current financial hole that we're already in, if you like, with the council in providing existing services to what I call real things like people and health and old age and so on and so forth. And yet we're contemplating diving down a hole that's going to cost £900 million or whatever it is in order to introduce things like ground source heating. Now, my experience of ground source heating is fairly simple. The cost is not just putting in the heating, but the cost is running it. And you're going to have to finish up with a whole lot of solar panels or other things on top of your buildings purely in order to keep the ground source heating working. And all I'm concerned about is when we make these big mission statements is that I think we're slightly losing touch with the realities of the world that we live in. And I would just like to draw attention simply to the fact that we are full of great ideas, but I'm very worried about the overall cost and practicalities of heading down this route. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to ask Stephen to come in on that.
Thanks, Councillor Lockhart. First of all, what I will say within there is we actually currently have 11 ground source heat pump solutions in place at our primary school estate, which have been running for at least 10 years now. So it's a proven technology within there. An advantage of ground source as well is that for every unit of electricity that's used to power the pump, it transfers up to 3 units of heat into a building. So from an efficiency perspective in there, a gas boiler may have no more than 95% efficiency, whereas a ground source heat pump would be generating 410% from efficiency. I do take account the fact at current rates it is more expensive, certainly from the capital perspective, because you are drilling down quite far into the ground. But again, when it comes to things like fair transition, you know, as well, if we are transitioning away from drilling for oil and gas, that's a natural resource that's becoming available then to reskill and then to use those experienced personnel who have been previously displaced because of transitions in the future to reskill and take them inland to safer environments and to utilise the heat that's stored within the land. And again, ground source was taken as the example from this analysis because ground temperatures are far more stable than air. So air source, again, which we have tried and tested in a number of our non-domestic properties within there and has been a success. Ground source is just an extension, and it's a tried and tested. We already have, as I say, 10 properties where this works.
Thank you. Councillor Lockhart, do you want to come back in with a supplementary? See your hand still raised.
Yeah, yes, please. Yes, thank you. I mean, I understand your answer. I think this is still not answering my point. If you put in ground source heating, first thing is that you are not able to heat the water or whatever it is up to the same temperature as you can with oil or with gas. So you have to change entire systems. You have to change all the radiators in the place. You have to put in underfloor heating. You've got massive extra costs in implementing ground source heating. And that's the point I'm making about, you know, we look at emissions, but we don't look at the cost of it all. And in my opinion, ground source heating is a very good idea, but you also have to run it. And anyone I know who's got ground source heating requires electricity to make it work. Now, that in turn means you either put solar panels on or you're using electricity. So whilst I understand the whole argument, if you like, about the efficiency, I just really want to make the point that I made previously, which is we are not necessarily looking at the cost.
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. Stephen wants to come in again, so I'm going to direct us to him.
Thank you, Councillor Lockhart. Very, very good point within there. We talked very briefly earlier, and it was highlighted within the paper as well, about the cost differential, and that currently UK government are looking at the cost. And in the past, the green levies, for example, for electricity have been put onto effectively the unit rate, which makes electricity far more expensive than gas. So if we're getting a heat pump that can generate 3 units of heat for 1 unit of electricity, but a unit of electricity is 5 times more expensive than a unit of gas, the economics don't work. But if those green subsidies and some other reform of the electricity market could start to equalise down or at least reduce the tariffs that are added to our electricity bills, the differential then becomes far greater and economics flip almost overnight, and in turn could actually drive the transition, because if you've got just now 1 unit of electricity producing 3 units of heat, you've got your cost in there of a 1 unit maybe being 30 pence. From the gas perspective, that might be 6 or 7 pence within there. If we can start bringing that unit cost of electricity down by taking off the green tariff, it then starts to become attractive because of the multiplier that we've got within there. But I take on board your point. I totally agree, and I fully agree there is a cost implication at this moment in time. But these are things and barriers which could be changed in the near future and could be major drivers for change.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to take a final comment now from Graham Scott.
Thank you, Chair. It's very similar to the point Councillor Lockhart made. Obviously, I spoke at and came in with about the heat pumps at the seminar last Friday, air source and ground source, and I'm certainly concerned in relation to, again, the unproven technology. Stephen says that it's proven technology, but we're still not being convinced that the heat pumps operating they cease to operate, or they start to malfunction at -5 degrees, which obviously, given our climate in Scotland, is feasible that we reach -5. In fact, one of my colleagues at the seminar last Friday, Councillor Barker, was talking about -20 to -25. So the idea that we're nailing all our colours to the mast of ground source or air source heat pumps, and as you pointed out, Stephen, in your great answer there, is that a lot of the electricity used for for it to be economically viable, there'll have to be government subsidies to make it viable. So in many ways, there's concerns that it'll leave councils with a huge economic bill in terms of using heat, air source or ground source heat pumps. If I can get an answer to that point.
Thank you very much, Graham. I'm going to go to Stephen again.
Thanks, Councillor Scott. Again, there's a number of theories behind how you would actually look at trying to equalise to some degree the electricity cost. Currently, there are green levies put onto the electricity rates, directly or indirectly, via subsidies for wind farms, via subsidies for solar, via subsidies for FIT payments. These all come previous policies, and that's how they are paid for as part of our day-to-day electricity bills. So it's not about taking these levies off. It's the government decisions of the past have put those levies onto the electricity rates. So it's now potentially looking at, is that the fairest way to actually recharge those, or bring them potentially through another sector, bring general taxation, for example. That's just an idea. People have talked about, should you take them off the electricity rate and put on gas? But if you do that, you then put people into fuel poverty, because a lot of heating systems are run from gas. So there's a lot of policy decisions in there that will be taken by Westminster regarding where we go with regards to this in the future. The main driver, though, has to be, how do we break the gap between the cost of gas and the electricity? It's too wide at this moment, Councillor Scott. That's where the problem lies in there. And part of the reason why electricity costs are so high is because of the subsidies that are added for your wind farms, for your contract for difference, for your FIT payments. Those decisions have put them on to the day-to-day bills historically. And it so happens now that we've gone down that particular road to try and reverse that now. How do you unravel, those various contracts that have been put in place over time? That's for people much wiser than me and other places to make that decision. But I would see that personally as being the driver through this whole transition, is to in some way equalise the cost, so it's more cost effective for you or I to run a heating system based on electricity than it would be to do that based on gas. And the win-win comes in there is that we reduce emissions from fossil fuel heating systems by burning gas in our house, by using electricity from greener sources such as wind farms, solar, etc. That's through the cables to our house.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to bring this to a close now. I think we're kind of talking about a lot of things that are really decided far above local authority level. And it does seem clear that the direction of travel is set nationally. And I would want to just add an additional contribution. I think that there's an importance here that people understand that the cost of electricity relative to gas has been rightly or wrongly maintained at an artificially high level. And that will change. And if we were just to continue, if we were to ignore or say the priority is to continue with kind of combustion heating systems, then we would reach a position at some point where that will change and the cost on households and councils and everyone else using gas would become suddenly very high indeed. So I think part of securing a just transition, part of making sure that people can avoid that kind of horrible cost of living scenario, is making sure that we do migrate across before that happens. And for those who believe in markets setting prices, I think it's inevitable that gas would eventually cost far more than electricity. So that's my 2 cents on it anyway. But with that, I'm going to move us on. So can I ask committee to agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6 in your agendas, pages 53 through 58. It's the Energy Demand Reduction Plan update, and John Smith is going to talk us through it. John.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, so just to introduce my report, and the purpose of it is just to provide the committee with an update on the work that we've undertaken to date on the development of an energy demand reduction plan. And that was contained within the motion which was approved by full council on the 7th of December 2022, and that was entitled Cut Fuel Bills, Cut Carbon Emissions, Kickstart the Green Economy. So the recommendations in the report is just for the committee to note the progress that's been made on the energy demand reduction plan to date, and those proposed actions going forward, and that the appendix to the report also be noted, which contains a whole series of actions. So just highlighting section 3 of the report, the background there. As I said, the motion was passed at full council, and that included a range of actions for the council to progress, including a requirement to consider how we would further reduce energy usage across the council's property portfolio. We had a previous report submitted to this committee on the 14th of June, when that proposed the approach of adopting and developing an energy demand reduction plan. So you'll see from section 4 of the report that an update on the actions that have been undertaken to date, and how we've got to where we are just now. So that included an analysis of the total energy usage in our non-domestic estate, and we identified from that the properties with the highest energy consumption. Within meetings with our technical team in Housing and Technical Resources, we confirmed that it wasn't practical or feasible to set an implementation point of 18 degrees across the board in all council buildings due to a range of factors, such as the ones listed in the report: construction types, thermal efficiency of the existing buildings, and perhaps their orientation, depending on whether they're getting solar gain and the like. We therefore agreed with the alternative in the motion was to look at a temperature reduction of 1 degree across the buildings where it is safe to do so. Just within those considerations, we omitted leisure facilities, as the utility bills are the responsibility of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. We also omitted secondary schools, as these aren't owned by the council, the buildings those not council owned, but also looking at the demographic for homes for the elderly and nursery schools. So just due to those demographics, we omitted them from this pilot project. So to test the concept, we have commenced a pilot in 30 buildings across the council's non-domestic estate, and we chose the properties meeting the criteria that I've mentioned there. The temperature of the space heating was lowered by 1 degree, and that happened between December last year and the beginning of January this year. And what we will do with these now is, in the pilot projects, we'll monitor that across a 6-month period, getting to the summer this year, looking at any operational or service issues, and that would be prior to rolling that out to other facilities. So just highlighting what's in section 5 is the other actions that we've taken. So looking at, that includes extending the Energy Champions programme, increasing the number of energy audits which have been carried out, and the disconnection of utility supplies in vacant properties. Just coming on to section 6 and the other actions that we're recommending for consideration: reducing the heating season, depending on the weather, obviously, external weather, further extending the Energy Champions programme following feedback from the pilot that we're undertaking, engaging with schools, for example, on looking at how they can reduce their own energy, how they can save energy, how they build it perhaps into the curriculum with the teachers and pupils, and how they can contribute to doing so. We're developing a staff behavioural change programme in relation to energy awareness, and there's already 4 courses available on the Learn Online programme for staff, so looking at how we can further develop that. And another point there is looking at engaging with IT services about shutdown of PCs and looking at software that can do that, and try and build these things in to save energy wherever possible. We will continue to monitor the use and the management of the energy within the buildings, and make sure that we've got meaningful reports available to our fellow resources monthly. But these will be on a weather-corrected basis, obviously, because the external weather conditions have a big impact on how much energy is required to heat the buildings. So we'll prepare quarterly reports in these buildings, and look at the top 20% of energy users, again within the Energy Champions programme, looking at senior nominated energy champions that we'll engage with, and again just making people aware of their energy use. This is about behaviour change. Obviously, coming on to section 8, we were asked to look at low or no cost measures to reduce bills, so there's no financial implications, thankfully, in this report. But it is about changing people's behaviour and just doing things that we can do within our gift to bring down energy costs. But again, the financial savings, and Stephen's mentioned a lot in his report, we're not in control of the cost of utilities. So we may not make financial savings, so we tend to focus more so on energy consumption as opposed to energy savings, because that, as I say, is not within the Council's influence. There's an appendix on page 57 of the report which details the action plan and the measures taken to date and the current status of these, and we can update that and bring it back to committee. So just in conclusion, I would just refer the committee back to the recommendations in section 2 and ask that the committee note the update on the progress made to date on the energy demand reduction plan and the proposed action going forward, and those actions that are detailed in Appendix 1.
Thank you very much, John. Can I ask any members, a couple have already done so, but any members interested in speaking to indicate now? Thank you. First up, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for that report. I would like to say the impact of climate change is certainly a real thing, but on this report, very much welcome it. It's good to see actions listed that are taken forward from the motion that was presented to Council. Even though we couldn't take forward the 18-degree set point, I understand the reasons for that, it's positive to see the 1 degree reduction, or at least the pilot, going forward. It's certainly like to see how the energy champion scheme rolls out around the council, and it would be good to get updates on that going forward, because it seems very interesting, and it would be good to see the impacts of that. My actual question though on the 1 degree reduction, although it couldn't be taken forward in SLC ran facilities, do we know if they're taking it forward themselves? Is that something they're looking at to do maybe through their energy champions? And is there any update generally you can provide on what SLC are doing?
Yeah, sure. David's, thanks for that, Ross. David's actually asked if he can come in first on that. David Bith.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Councillor Clark. I just thought I would just come in, just given my previous history managing SLLC. There are certain things, and then I'll maybe pass on for more technical detail, but there are certain things within the leisure and cultural sector, particularly the leisure sector, where there is already existing guidance on what temperatures should be. So, for example, a sports hall will have Sports Scotland guidance in terms of what a sports hall temperature should be, and that's relating, sometimes it changes depending on the sport, but there's a general activity sort of temperature, so that already kind of dictates what those temperatures are in a lot of those sort of spaces. And also you need to take account in terms of a swimming environment, there has to be a differential between the air temperature and the pool water temperature, and by reducing one you have to reduce the other, which can kind of take it into levels that are not appropriate for swimming or acceptable in terms for public swimming or competition swimming as well. So there are other factors that relate in terms of a lot of the sports and leisure kind of areas. But with that, I don't know if Stephen wants to add anything else to that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clark. There is one other complication, and any time I speak, it's always a complication. 4 out of the top 5 council properties that consume most gas are in leisure, and 4 of those sites contain what's called the CHP, a combined heat and power unit, where 10-15 years ago these were installed for 2 purposes. One, to reduce carbon emissions, because at that stage gas was cleaner than electricity, and secondly, the cost differential that I've been going on about continually, or it seems to be I've gone on continually, means that on these sites that use huge amounts of gas, the gas is actually burnt to generate cheap electricity. And the byproduct of burning that gas to produce the cheap electricity is huge sums of heat, which is then used to utilise to heat the pool water, etc. So again, looking at the title for the bit in there, cut fuel bills, if we were to switch these combined heat and power units off, we would actually significantly increase the cost, because it would mean then going back to grid electricity.
Thank you very much. Going to go to Councillor Allison.
Talking about the vacant properties, could you maybe give us a wee bit more information as to what type of properties that you're going to take the utility services and be disconnected, which sounds sensible, but then again, there can be, again, unintended consequences. Buildings draw damp, and if you're then going to reuse these buildings, they have to be dried out, which would have a greater carbon footprint. So what buildings are you talking about? Hopefully it's not residential vacant properties.
Thanks for that, Alec. I'm going to go to Stephen to come in on that one.
Councillor Allison. To date, we have a vacant property procedure that takes place. So once a property becomes vacant, we don't actually physically disconnect the services from site. So, for example, you may need some background heating, for example, as you've said in there. You may need various other life cycle services in the background. So where John is saying about the disconnection, it would actually effectively be going in and disconnecting circuits within the property. So, for example, if, as you rightly say, you know, within there, we count in the winter months, you would never go in and completely isolate all the electrics in there when you need some background heating to make sure that, you know, various parts of the building don't fall apart. So it's not actually about physically disconnecting from the utility to take off the gas, the water and the electricity. It's a temporary disconnection to stop and minimise the energy usage through that period. But they will tend to be in properties that have been given up by resource, have been through the property bulletin, and are probably, you know, whether it be the CAP process or Jerry, I don't know if
Thank you very much. I think Jerry wants to come in.
Thank you. Just to confirm that we would only ever fully disconnect if the decision had been made to sell or demolish a property. Any reuse of the building obviously would require the background heating to remain.
Thank you very much for that. Alec, you want a supplementary?
I know, just to point out that's not quite what 5.3 says, because it says the water supply pipes drain down and reduce energy consumption down to standing charges only. So I'm more pleased with what I hear from the officers than what's in the report.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Robb.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the report. I think it's really welcome, the detail that you've gone into and the processes that you've started through the energy audits and the energy champions. It really emphasises like an energy hierarchy, doesn't it? Let's not waste it in the first place. You'll reduce demand first, and then linking to the other reports, it's fabric first, and then it's changing the source of the heating, so it's in that kind of hierarchy. The cheapest form of electricity or energy is the one that you don't use in the first place. So that sounds good. And just a couple of questions. Will the communications and promotion around the energy awareness include practical things like reminders to switch off lights and instructions in rooms? So we've all been in rooms where it's either too hot or too cold. You don't want to press any red buttons, you know. Will it include reminders like that? And just to get a bit more information, how it will be reported, picking up on Councillor Clark's comment, how we'll hear more about how it's all going. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, Stephen again, looking to come in. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Councillor Robb. I think, as John mentioned earlier, there's already 4 Learn Online modules, one for energy audit, one for building and energies, one for saving energy in the workplace, and one for energy saving for janitors. So I would assume that we could be speaking to our colleagues in training and ask for regular reports of completions that perhaps could be reported at, you know, whatever frequency we want to do in the future within there. I think that's a report that should be fairly standard to be able to be run, I think, for other areas.
Yeah, I'm hearing that's something we can look at, so thank you very much for that, Stephen. Right, I'm going to ask committee to agree to note the report.
Agreed.
Thank you. The final report we're going to hear today, Scottish Government consultations on social housing net zero standards and heat in buildings. That's the bill. Pages 59 through 64. Jonathan Reid's going to talk us through it. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of this report then is to provide committee with an overview of two recent Scottish Government consultations, as the Chair said, on the proposed new net zero standard for social housing and the new heat and buildings bill that we've already heard some discussion about this morning. The report will also provide a summary of the Council's response to these consultations, both of which closed by the Scottish Government in early March 2024. Recommendations are set out in Section 2 are that the overview of the consultations be noted and the response submitted by the Council to each also be noted. Section 3 sets out the background to this report, and as members have already heard this morning, this all stems from the Heat and Building Strategy published in 2021, where the Scottish Government made two commitments. The first of which to review the existing standards for improving energy efficiency within social housing across Scotland, and the second to introduce new legislation to phase out the need to install new or replacement fossil fuel boilers across all domestic and non-domestic buildings in Scotland. Section 4 provides an overview of the consultation on the social housing net zero standards. So this is the replacement for what members may be aware of was the Energy Efficiency for Social Housing Standard, or EISH, as more commonly known. And this would impact around 32,000 homes across South Lanarkshire, with 25,000 or so being the responsibility of the Council. Sections 4.2 and 4.3 set out the proposals contained within the standard, with a lot of confirmation still to happen from the Scottish Government side. And at 4.4, we note that the proposed implementation date of 2025. Draw your attention to section 4.7, where we report on the response that we provided of the Council's implications, and we submitted this on the 8th of March 2024. In summary, we're overall supportive of the fabric efficiency rating based on heat demand being implemented. However, we do highlight the significant costs associated with this and the additional support that would be required in order to allow that just transition to happen and essentially to avoid tenants having to pay to cover all this. We strongly disagree with one element of the proposals in that they aim to prevent the relet of properties if they do not meet the proposed standards by 2028. Given the implications going on within the housing sector just now, that would obviously add more pressure to the pressures that the housing sector is facing, and therefore we've suggested that a phased approach might be more appropriate. In terms of installing clean heating systems by 2045, we recognise the contribution this can make to tackling climate change, wider climate change targets. However, again, highlight the significant costs and practical challenges associated with this, particularly with retrofitting on existing buildings. And again, some of the conversation from earlier on this morning around ground source heat pumps leads to that as well. And overall, we're supportive of a 2025 implementation date, noting that it provides clarity on standards now required, obviously assist us with our housing investment programme and our affordable housing supply programme, where we're working towards the previously reported on standards, so any changes to these would be beneficial for us. And we note at 4.8 that the full response is available to all members on request. Section 5 of the report covers the second consultation then, so this one's on the Heat and Buildings Bill, and the response from the Council as well. And we provide an overview of the new legislation that's proposed. It covers domestic and all domestic and non-domestic buildings in Scotland. And the key areas set out at section 5.2. And the highlight figure from that would obviously be the prohibit the use of polluting heating systems after 2045. The Council's proposed response, the Council's full response to this one is set out at 5.5 of the report. And overall, we note that we're fully supportive of the necessity to transition to clean heating systems to achieve climate change commitments and targets. However, we do recognise the significant financial challenges that property owners may face, and ourselves included in that, as we've already heard this morning, and particularly in the present financial climate. We have called on the Scottish Government, therefore, to suggest a full range of funding options that may be available, and particularly for local authorities that the transition requires to be fully funded and resourced. Includes any additional responsibilities on councils to monitor and enforce this standard right across the private sector buildings as well. And finally, we've raised concerns around the application of a cost cap that they're proposing that stipulates a maximum amount of property owner may be expected to pay, which we believe may result in a number of loopholes, may result in a number of properties not meeting the standard. which kind of puts against the whole theory behind the legislation, which aims to drive us all towards achieving net zero. Our concerns don't relate to the cost cap itself. We totally understand the necessary to have that the consumer protection element, but it's more about the options that they've presented as what cost cap may look like, and the implications that will have for certain areas, particularly if it's linked to property prices across different parts of Scotland. In terms of next steps, are set out at section 6, and we'll obviously keep this committee and all the committees up to date on national developments in this area, particularly when there's any significant implications to the council. And you can see by the content of the consultations themselves that there will be some implications. We've set out in summary some of these in section 7 and section 8 in relation to employees and finances. Finally, I draw the committee's attention back to the recommendations set out in section 2, where we ask for members to note the content of the consultations and the summary of the council's response to each. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. If I can ask any members to indicate now if they would wish to comment or ask questions. First up, we've got Councillor Keat.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Jonathan, for going through that report. Could I just get a bit of further clarity on the reletting aspect that you brought to our attention there? That would be good, thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Of course, thank you, Councillor, for your question. It's a good point to raise because it's something that took us back a little bit when we read the consultation documents. So every member will be aware of the pressures currently faced in the housing sector, particularly in the social housing sector, where we have demand essentially outstripping supply. So what the government proposed within the consultation was that despite the fact they haven't agreed on what the final standard may look like and the fact that it's going to be implemented in 2025, that any local authority or RSL not meeting that standard by 2028 would not be able to relet that house. So in other words, we'd have to go in and get up to the standard as part of the void work should a house become available after that date. That, to us, doesn't seem reasonable. We don't know what the final standard may look like. We don't know what the average cost might be to bring up a property up to that standard. So we've suggested that, given the pressures we already face, it's simply not going to be feasible for us to do that. And we've suggested a more phased approach might be appropriate. We also recognise the need to upgrade properties at that point, and that's the most viable point to do that, rather than disrupting tenants to go in and do what might be significant works when they're already living there. Should a property become vacant, that's when we would go in and do the upgrade work. But to suggest that we wouldn't be able to relet those properties in 3-4 years' time to a standard that we don't actually know yet is just simply unacceptable to us, and we've highlighted that in the response.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Councillor Walker.
Just a couple of things. Can I ask, in terms of new build, the developers, are they bound by legal requirements to actually implement those standards? And also, you know, is there any way of us being able to, you know, access kind of funding in relation to, you know, community benefit in order to actually target towards that in terms of both, you know, private and social housing building? So I'd just like some clarification on that. And also slightly concerning, I mean, 4.6 billion, there needs to be, as we spoke about earlier, you know, a very robust financial support package around that. I really don't think it's enough to say we hope the private sector are going to come in. I mean, not when you're talking about something as major as this, in terms of, you know, a national policy in relation to house building, both across social housing and private sector housing. There needs to be a far more robust financial support package. And most of what I've heard this morning, particularly in relation to the earlier discussion around the heat systems and how that was going to, you know, develop into much higher costs, you know, for tenants, householders, users of energy supplies. I mean, we cannot, you know, expect the most vulnerable, you know, to pay the price for this. I mean, they paid the price for the bank recessions, for austerity, all the rest of it. They should not be paying for this. So I think it's really important. While I welcome the report and agree it's absolutely necessary, I don't think it's enough to be saying we hope the private sector are going to come in at some point. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think we all hope for robust action at central government level to mitigate these issues. Jonathan, do you want to come
Thank you, Councillor. Absolutely. So in terms of the legislation proposed for the standards for all properties, so it will be developers building private sector housing will be responsible for that. Developers, anybody building non-domestic buildings will be responsible for making sure they meet the standards as well. So it's wide ranging and it covers every area. For us, we've obviously been building to a higher standard for a number of years. As I mentioned, the EASH standard that we previously had. So you're seeing almost the private sector catch up now with social housing standards that have been in place for a number of years. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the market, impacts housing costs right across the country. So that's something we'll certainly keep an eye on. But as far as we're concerned, it's a positive thing that the sectors are moving together and everybody will be at the same standard of housing. The figures you quoted, so the 4.6 billion, that's only for the element of clean heating. So that's the bit that certainly we've been hearing a bit about this morning around the cost to achieve net zero through your heating alone. So it doesn't include the Fabric First upgrades that would be there. And yeah, it's eye-watering figures. The government have created a Green Heat Task Force or Finance Task Force that they look to provide a report on later in the year, which aims to include all the public sector funding that might be available. It includes the private sector contributions as well, or at least models that may be able to support in achieving this transition. I would highlight that it's quite a while away in terms of some of the standards that need to be in place. So 2045 is the kind of the end date, if you like, the backstop date. So there is a bit of time for this to start being figured out, which is I suppose, positive. And finally, your last point around the most vulnerable in society, that's something that we drew out in a response to both consultations, and that making sure that any of these have unintended consequences for those that simply don't understand what they need to do or that don't have the means to do it. And it's something that we've been saying all along throughout many consultations and many discussions with Scottish Government and with partners right across South Lanarkshire, is that we need to be thinking about how any of these changes that we make at a strategic or policy level will impact those that are the most vulnerable in society. And it's certainly something we'll continue to do going forward as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Councillor Keat again because I think he probably has a supplementary after earlier on. So, Gavin, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just a brief follow-up to my original question to Jonathan. And I must admit, that was my interpretation of what you outlined in terms of relating. But I'm actually a bit in disbelief that given the Scottish Government are due to announce a housing emergencies, we've got local authorities declaring housing emergencies, Shelter Scotland declaring housing emergencies, that this is an approach that the Scottish Government are adopting, given the scale of the crisis facing individuals, families, children across this country. So I suppose the point I'm making is I'm very much in support of the Council's response to that consultation. Full support with that. Jonathan, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Gavin. Bert Thompson, Councillor Thompson.
Quick points. One is, how realistic are we having these policies fully funded? And I spoke to John Swinney a few years ago. His indication is very keen to re-let properties and also in hard-to-let areas, properties lying empty. Yeah, an indication that's still the case. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Jonathan's going to come in on that one again.
In terms of the funding, obviously we're particularly for the first part of the report, which was the consultation on the social housing net zero standards. So we have a significant housing investment programme, which is paid for through the housing revenue account. So there's already work, and there has been work going on for a number of years on bringing our properties up to standard, which is funded through tenant rent. What we lack clarity in right now is what standard we should be expected to meet, and that's why we're keen to get the standard in place as quickly as possible. But there is a funding mechanism for that. We've heard earlier on this morning as well in some of the other reports that Fabric First is our approach. So take the heating element out. We have gas boilers that work very well just now. We have heating systems that work very well. We have a significant number of properties moved to an air source heat pump that is working. But we need to wrap the properties up as warm as possible. So let's get the fabric done in place and let's make sure that the heating is reduced in the first place. And then using the funding that we've got through the housing revenue account, we can absolutely do that. In terms of non-domestic buildings, absolutely, it's something we've heard already that the amount is far too high for any programme that we've got in the council to meet. So in terms of realistic delivery from internally from the council, it's probably not, but let's wait and see what the Green Heat Task Force come back with in terms of finance options, because there may be something there that can support the council to meet what it needs to do. In the private sector, there's already a whole host of schemes that are available for homeowners to upgrade their properties, for private landlords to access grants as well, and we'd look to see them continue at the very least, and hopefully be expanded as well to allow more and more households to make the transition. As to the sustainability of that, that's obviously a decision at national government and what funding is available for them, but it's certainly something that is already happening, and we're seeing homes move across as we progress and get closer towards these target dates.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm going to take a final intervention from Councillor Clark. Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jonathan, for the report. Just very briefly, again, to respond to Councillor Keats' political point, this is a consultation, not an introduced piece of legislation, and I'm glad that the Council are being asked of their views and that we have put in a very robust response, and I thank Jonathan for his answer to other councillors' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd said that was the last one, so I'm going to stick to that. So apologies, Councillor Keat. And with that, I'm going to ask committee to agree to note the report.
Great.
Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 8, which is urgent business. I have none has been intimated. So with that, I'll thank everyone for their attendance and contributions, both officers and councillors, as always, and wish you all well and bring the meeting to a close. Cheers.